Hired?
Wow, good question.
I apologize. We are out of time. However, next up is Mr. Shawari. I'm sure he will allow time to answer that if he chooses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, welcome. Minister, can you explain to the committee what services fall under the professional and special services categories?
And respond to the honourable member's false allegations that she is touting on social media and in committee. I have complied with the conflict of interest guidelines. I have ensured that I've complied in terms of disclosure and screens, and I would caution the honourable member against making false allegations before she has the actual facts. And if she would like to make a further inquiry with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, I invite her to do so. They have confirmed that I have complied, and I signed no contracts, recused myself from every single meeting, and voluntarily recused myself from others in order to ensure that the screens remained in place. My Deputy Minister and Chief of Staff reinforced the screens and ensured that I was recused. I find it highly questionable that a member of Parliament would make false allegations against another member of Parliament without checking her facts.
Thank you, Minister. I can assure you that the member that you talked about was actually standing in the back of the room and listening to you. But quickly going back along the same line, Minister, did you actually, because we're now focusing on the comment that Ms. Kuzi made, she's also made the allegation, at least that's the way I processed it, that you're responsible for signing all these checks that the government is spending. Have you signed any as a minister on responsible for many portfolio? Have you signed any checks that has anything to do with ArriveCan or any other application or projects?
Again, I have not. I was not involved in any way relating to the ArriveCan contracts. Those contracts did not come to me as minister. And once again, I find it highly questionable that members of the opposition would be making allegations without actually checking the facts. We are in an age of misinformation and disinformation, and it is incumbent upon us from a legal and a moral standpoint to ensure that before we make allegations, we actually have the facts at our fingertips. And once again, I'm glad you've asked that question. I did not sign any of those contracts. I did comply with the conflict of interest screens and disclosure obligations, and I will continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. But I don't think to the Canadian that should be any surprise. I think the leader of opposition gets up during the question period every day and makes false allegation and mislead Canadians across many aspects. So this is not something that we are not new to sitting in this committee, because we see it on a daily basis in the House of Commons in front of many Canadians. I only got about 30 seconds. Can you talk about the main estimate that you just recently published? How much have the voted on expenditure change in this year main estimates?
I'm afraid you only have about 15 seconds.
That's all I need. Voted on expenditures are down 6.6 billion or 3.3% from the 2023-2024 main estimates. Thank you.
Thanks. Mrs. Vignola for 2 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Minister, I'd like to come back to the official languages. Currently, under several contracts, use of English is required. And some point out that the people who are hired may need to use or may be required to use French. My question is simple. Why is it not obligatory in both cases? Why is French never obligatory? And and that English is going to be possibly needed. Why isn't it? Why is one optional and the other isn't? Well, that's a very important question, because today is Francophonie Day, so I'd like to wish you a good Francophonie Day, Chair. And I'd like to say that departments must ensure that they are complying with the Official Languages Act. It is an obligation on their part. And I take that obligation very seriously. I want to continue working on Part 7 of that act. And I can expand on that if you like. Thank you. A few weeks ago, an individual was hired at the Coast Guard, and they were responsible for files involved with Quebec. It was a unilingual Anglophone who was hired. And on the St. Lawrence River now, it is becoming more and more difficult for people working with the Coast Guard and with pilots to be able to work in French. They receive their orders in English. When this is the St. Lawrence River, and we're talking about the safety of users on that river and of the public. So can you ensure that from now on, senior civil servants, regardless of the department they work with, will be bilingual, and that bilingualism doesn't just apply to Francophones?
In order to get you out at a decent time, Minister, we have to follow our timelines. We are past. Perhaps you can respond in writing to Mrs. Vignola. Mr. Disley for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll now turn to a troubling concern of reports of significant cuts to Indigenous Services Canada and Crown Indigenous Relations at the approximate amount of $417 million. And the Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs said just recently, quote, "It's simply unacceptable and irresponsible for the ministers to cut funding when First Nations are already in a constant state of emergency." It's clear that some of this, of course, stems from lawsuits that the government has lost. It's troubling in some ways, considering that this is a matter of both legality and morality, something you just cited, Madam Minister, as important aspects of how we govern our country. It's important that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit also receive the same level of respect and dignity that their services that they rely on also enjoy. Can you please tell us in this committee, where will the $417 million be cut?
I want to confirm that, as described in their departmental plans, both Indigenous Services Canada and CERNA will have reallocations from internal services and operational efficiencies, travel efficiencies, and streamlining professional services towards resolving claims and agreements, not in terms of services as described in your question. And furthermore, we took a special view of both ISC and CERNA during that process to allow both ministries time to engage in consultation as required under Truth and Reconciliation. We take that very seriously, and so there was a carve-out for both of those ministries in order for them to
Sorry, just one more question. In relation to the Jordan's Principle, which is the largest concern that many have, including the Indian Residential School Survivors Fund, these two funds in particular have been quoted as seeing a reduction in spending. This is a concern I think First Nations, Métis, and Inuit have across the country. Could you please provide in writing to this committee information, detailed information as to the cuts to programs, services, and grants, please?
Thanks very much. Wonderful. Thanks.
Jordan's
Mr. Genuis, please, for 4.
Thank you, Chair. We'll be doing a bit of splitting over here. Minister, you were the Public Services and Procurement Minister when this whole Arrive scam journey started. Can you help us with this key question? Who made the decision to choose GC Strategies?
That decision did not occur at Treasury Board, and from reading the Auditor General's report, I understand that it came at CBSA.
Okay, Minister, you were the Minister of PSPC at the time. Did you have any eyes on who made that decision? The problem we have with this issue is that there's this grave corruption scandal, and yet everybody's saying that somebody else is responsible and nobody's taking responsibility. Can you help us shed any light on that?
I can answer the question truthfully, and I did not have eyes on any of the matters relating to the application or that supplier. My mandate during the pandemic was procuring vaccines. We were the most vaccinated country in the world by July 2021.
Thanks, Commissioner. That's not the question, but thank you for your response. As we try to get to the bottom of what happened, Minister, do you think there is a role, or should be a role, or has been a role of ministerial decision making in setting any guidelines that would prevent what happened with the Arrive scandal? We continuously hear that ministers have nothing to do with these decisions. That's the line we hear from you, from other ministers. But it leaves me wondering what ministers are doing here other than kind of receiving briefings about process.
The role of Treasury Board is to ensure that we have guidelines in place and rules in place, like the Directive on Conflict of Interest and like the announcement I made today to increase
Sorry, but Minister,
the
rules
oversight
weren't
via
followed.
The
rules weren't followed, and then your
professional
department did
services
nothing.
guide.
So I'm going to now hand the time over to Mr. Brock.
I have one question, Minister. Two middlemen companies, Government of Canada Strategies and Dalian combined, received $27 million in taxpayer dollars on the Arrive Scan app. The combined ownership of both companies is 1, 2, 3, 4 people. 2 companies. Do you agree with a majority of Canadians that there is a serious problem in this country with government contracting?
I agree with the Auditor General's report that stated there was a serious problem with the contracting undertaken by CBSA for this application, and we are prepared to follow the recommendations of the RCMP when they are forthcoming. And in advance of that, I have made an announcement to make sure that we are increasing the oversight under our guide for managers and professional services.
To my colleague, Ms. Kuzi.
Thank you.
As Receiver General for Canada, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement is responsible for overseeing all the funds coming in and going out of government accounts. What is at the bottom of every single check that comes out from the Government of Canada? The signature of the Receiver General for Canada, the Minister of Procurement. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Souza, you've got like 13 seconds before we have to dismiss the minister.
So do you want
4
me to,
minutes, sir.
you want me to proceed? Okay, I'm going to share I'd like to share 2 minutes of my time with the Vice Chair, Mr. Majid Jawari. Minister, thank you for being here, and I appreciate you and your team and the extended and the amount of work that you do in clamping down on fraud and enhancing accountability. And I know that some members opposite have been going on about the double dippers. Of course,